Good morning. Can everybody hear me all right? It's going to be a little strange giving a presentation standing in one place. I walk around all the time, so I got to get a little used to this. It feels like I'm teaching a class with the whole back of the room is full and all the front chairs are empty. If everybody wants to move up, you can do that. But so I am Bob Umland, sales manager at NuSil Technology. We are a silicone raw material manufacturer based in California. I'm going to talk for the next few minutes about customized silicones for long-term implants. So how they can be customized and what kind of results you can get from the customization. So we're going to talk about some common terms as they relate to silicones, a little bit of basic elastomer chemistry, overview of the common types of fillers, what types of applications, and then some trade-offs that you see between mechanical properties and viscosities when you do different types of filler manipulation. So why silicone for healthcare? It is the most researched biomaterial to date. It's been around since the early 1950s. There are pacemaker leads that are still in people that have been in greater than 30 years, and in a couple cases it's documented a little bit over 40 years, so they are still in place and have not broken down. So what is silicone used for? It's used for stents, it's used for IOLs, ports, trachs, feeding tubes, cochlear implants, birth control devices, pacemaker devices. And what we're going to talk about a little bit today is the addition of fillers, so you can make modifications in the silicone itself. So what can you do with fillers and what will some of the results be? So silicone products, they are an entire gambit of adhesives, primers, fluids, foams, greases, gels, fluorosilicones. Fluorosilicones, I will mention for just a moment here, they've always traditionally been aerospace compounds. It's a bigger, bulkier molecule. It's a little bit different than a standard, quote-unquote, dimethyl silicone, a standard silicone. In healthcare, we've seen in the last 4 or 5 years a drastic increase in the interest for fluorosilicones. There was always the misnomer that they would never pass a bioscreen, which is absolutely false. Number two, what you'll see with fluorosilicones in a lot of cases is a difference or a more preferential release when it comes to APIs and things such as those. So it's a different molecule, it does things a little bit differently. We're seeing a lot of interest in those type of products, particularly when it comes to drug delivery applications. And then of course high consistency, which is extrudable silicones, and then liquid silicones, which are moldable compounds. So how do you make a silicone? You take a monomer and you open it up and you make a polymer. Now you reinforce it. So if I had a silicone polymer here, I could pull it that far and it would come apart. If I reinforce that with resin or with silica, I can pull that 10 times, 12 times, so you get elongation from it, you get strength. So you're using a reinforcing agent, which is a resin or a silica. Now that makes a base, and base becomes, with a condensation cure or a peroxide cure, those are one parts, so the base is the product. To make an addition cure material, we divide the base in half. So you take the polymer plus the silica or the resin, so polymer plus reinforcing agent, make a base, divide it by 2, and now you have your A and B. One side is the catalyst side, the other side is the crosslinker side. So we're talking about fillers. Well, what about unfilled? So a gel, a silicone gel is basically a polymer. So where in the previous slide we saw we added silica or resin to it to reinforce it, a gel would be the polymer with no reinforcing agent. So what do we use gels for? Absolute number one thing that we're talking to people about with gels today, tacky gels, is wound care. Topical wound care, topical coverings for wounds, topical antimicrobial coverings for wounds, topical drug delivery devices for wounds, and skin and scar management. Those are very much the buzzwords. Non-healthcare, it is the number one type of compound used in LEDs, which is, I would say in 3 or 4 years, going to be the only type of lighting you'll be able to purchase. And then for long-term implants inside the body, the aesthetic implants. They feel very human tissue-like. So what do you fill? What are some common fillers for silicone? So number one, fumed silica, precipitated silica. So silica, which a couple slides ago we talked about adding silica to the polymer. This is the most common thing we add. What does it do? It gives it strength. Another, I would say, second most common material we add is diatomaceous earth or ground quartz. What are these added for? They will increase the strength, they'll increase the viscosity, they'll make the material harder. In healthcare, we are adding these primarily for drug release. They hold and release drug differently than silica-containing compounds. Coloration, pigments, dyes, those are fairly self-explanatory. Radio-opacity, barium sulfate and tungsten are added to elastomers to make them radio-opaque. This is very, very common, whether it be a whole device or a portion of a device. APIs, that's probably the biggest thing we're adding to silicones across the board now. Steroids, hormones, silvers, antibiotics, antimicrobials. Thermal stability, thermally conductive compounds. You're looking at iron oxide, boron nitrides. Conductive materials in healthcare, we look at a lot of times with gold and carbon black. There are some fillers in non-healthcare that we do add in some other cases. Now the one thing I will mention, many times, so if you take a material that has, a typical material that has silica in it and you want to add barium sulfate to get radio opacity, you may need to remove some of the silica because it may do, the addition of barium sulfate may do detrimental things to the other properties of the silicone. So you may be custom formulating the entire compound to get it to what you want it to be. So if you look, some of the functional fillers, fumed silica, reduced density. I see this very little in the healthcare industry, but microballoons in the aerospace and non-healthcare industry for reducing density and bond line thickness control. The majority of the compounds we make that go into the non-healthcare industry, a big share of them have microballoons in them. Color, you know, any color under the rainbow. You can go from black to white to just about any custom color you want to match the color scale. Boron nitride, iron oxide, diatomaceous earth, conductive compounds, carbon, silver, many different choices. So we've talked a bit about silica, and if you look at the two common types of silica used, if you were trying to build strength, which one would you use? I think it's pretty straightforward. It's like night and day. The fumed silica is almost like a weave, where the precipitated silica, which isn't used, is basically just particles that don't intertwine with each other. So what do you do with silica reinforced elastomers? Calendared sheeting, extruded tubing, molded components. These have no other additions. If you look at the tubing down at the bottom right-hand corner, you see that tubing is white. It probably has barium sulfate in it, added to it to make it radio opaque. The sheeting, as you can see up above, that would be a high consistency that would have some sort of a mesh inside to give it strength. A shaft and a balloon on the left-hand side. So we've talked a bit about silica reinforcement being a common reinforcement. The other less used but almost equally as common reinforcement for silicones is resins. What you get with resins that is in some ways beneficial is you can get lower viscosity, so you get decent physical properties with a lower viscosity elastomer. You can get optical clarity, so interocular lenses are typically resin filled. You get hydrometer, so hard, flowable, clear material. If you were making an IOL, that's what you'd be looking for. If you were making an LED, that's what you would be looking for. Couple other things with silicone resins, PSAs, so drug delivery patches from Nicoderm to birth control, Hollywood special effects. Typically they're solvent-borne PSAs that have resin in them as the reinforcing agent. So if you think that patch in the top picture, that doesn't need a lot of strength. It needs to stick, but the non-woven or the woven that it's applied to is what gives it the strength. It's not so much the silicone. The silicone's there to hold it in place. Encapsulants, like I said, these are low viscosity materials, so they're easily used as potting and encapsulating compounds. And IOLs, like down in the bottom right corner. So, why are you filling silicones? You're doing something that you want to do differently than a standard silicone. I think the biggest thing, and I mentioned it before, to keep in mind when we're affecting the properties of a silicone is viscosity. You can drive viscosity to the point very quickly with a filler to make it unusable. How do we put them in? They can be blended in, mixed in, they can be put in the base process, they can be put in the polymer process. There's a lot of different places we can put them in. So the last 2 points are kind of interesting. With a reinforcing silicone, so you say, we had talked about silica and resin, so 10% to 30% by weight gives it the reinforcement. If you want a conductive material, you're looking at 80% or greater by weight, because you need point-to-point contact for the fillers themselves to make the material conductive. So, conductive silicones, you have to balance a lot of factors. The filler shape and size. We use electrically conductive fillers that look like, obviously much smaller than my fingers, but look like little straight rods. We look like some that look like a little helix, some that look like a little cone. So you're trying to achieve different things with different fillers. And then you have to get them to interact with the polymers. So how they wet out, how they go into solution, how they stay in with the polymer, how they stay in contact with each other, all affects the conductivity. So once again, you're loading these very heavily. These conductive compounds end up with specific gravities up in the 3s, very heavy compounds. So how are we formulating this system? You have to be aware of the loading level. You need to be aware of the ultimate weight. You make a material very, very conductive, it becomes very, very heavy. That affects some other portion of your device or unit that you're manufacturing. We have to mix these in consistently and with good consistency. It can't cause clumping. What type of equipment is used to put these in? Things, a lot of shear, a lot of power, slow speed. Now, particle shape, and I mentioned before different things like spheres, rods, cones, different things like that. You have to be very careful when you're mixing these in. If I purchase a bag of a specific filler to add into a silicone elastomer and it's a cone, and I choose a mixer and a time and a mechanism to mix this that breaks those cones. It defeated the purpose of using that type of filler for the conductivity you're looking for. And then ultimately, how's it going to be used? Is it going to be extruded, calendared? Will it be crushed? Does it have to be a sprayable compound? So all things that have to be thought about. APIs, antimicrobials, another thing you have to think about. Number one, the type. Will it affect the cure? Does it damage the cure? Is it detrimental to the cure of the silicone? If we blended it in and it didn't cure, it wouldn't do anybody any good. Surface area. So how, if you need to have a uniform surface, it has to be throughout the profile, it has to be uniform. You still need mechanical properties. If you make a inserted port, eventually that port has to be removed. It still has to have tensile, tear, and elongation so it can be removed and not damaged. Choosing, going back to the filler slide and thinking about fillers, we need to adjust the silicone itself to get the proper drug delivery rate, the proper elution profile, and rheology. So you need to be able to process it. So silicones, as I mentioned before, fluorosilicones are becoming more popular in drug delivery. Dimethyl silicones are the standard silicones. There is also phenyl silicones. These are being used. And diffusivity. So how does the active molecule move through the system, through the silicone? Based on many factors: molecular weight, molecular volume, cross-link density. All these things can be changed. Steric hindrance, filler interactions. Does it bind preferentially? If there's two fillers, does the API, as an example, bind preferentially to one and not to the other? How soluble the material is. Is it soluble in silicone? Is it water soluble? Does it have to be dispersed in a solvent first and then reacted? So many things to have to be thought about. And we consider, in many ways, an API or an antimicrobial are just a different filler. So this is just a nice little shot of, this is a filled silicone. So you've taken the API. So if you look, the blue lines are polymer, the blue discs are silica, and the red globs are the active. So it's all moving throughout itself. Two main types of drug delivery devices: reservoirs. So you take and you fill it, like if you think of a balloon, you fill the balloon with air. That's a reservoir. It's full of air. If you look at a matrix configuration, this would be like taking a baseball, and the entire baseball has active throughout it, throughout the matrix itself. Where the balloon, it's just the air that's inside and not the shell itself. So kind of two different mechanisms. And the very last thing in so many of these cases, when you add any type of filler, be it an active or a conductive compound, you need to be able to support it. You need to think about the material design. You need to realize what it requires of a formulation, whether it's healthcare or non-healthcare. Many things, if you're making an FDA submission, have to be documented. Your filler content, the cross-link density, any additives that have been added in addition to standard fillers, what type of testing, where's it manufactured, what type of regulatory support. It becomes a very complex thing, much more straightforward than just getting a simple, straightforward release profile or an elution profile. So, to sum up, and I think I'm probably close to out of time, silicones lend themselves to be a great candidate for filler incorporation, and they can be used for many different applications, from aerospace to antimicrobial drug delivery materials, keeping in mind that there are trade-offs. Something gives in many cases. And the last key thing, I think, is the importance of working with a vendor who can support your endeavors as you go forward. And with that, if anybody has any questions, you can ask them now or stop me afterwards. Or thank you very much. Any other questions, stop by our booth.